We have a panel. Okay, we're recording you. If you could put in the chat, but please to everyone, not just the hosts and panelists, because we have both the folks who are here as part of the panel, the members of the Workforce Advisory Council, and then we have members who are participating, or folks who are participating in more of an observing capacity. So awesome. Thank you all very much. Perfect. Okay, and then so much has happened since we saw you last in terms of our progress in the areas of workforce, both sort of our immediate next steps that we shared with you last time, kind of responding to the urgency of the needs in the field. So building the pipeline in the immediate term with some key strategies. And then also continuing to work on sort of the longer term vision of meaningful career pathways and compensation for our workforce. So I'm excited to share in a couple of our areas, particularly we talked at some length here about apprenticeship opportunities and trying to move that forward in the early childhood space. And so we've made some great progress with our partners in there. So we're going to update you there. The Early Education and Care Scholarship is a program we run in collaboration with the Department of Higher Education through their financial assistance or financial aid programs. It's existed since 2006 and needed some substantial sort of dusting off and updating. And so we've been working with them on some important updates that really bring the program into responding more to the current moment for early education and care staff. So excited to share some of the updates we're planning there. And then we've had an ongoing partnership with the Mass Association of Community Colleges to try and move sort of system-wide work across our community colleges so that they're responsive to the needs of our early education workforce, and it's sort of enhancing and deepening the partnership with the community colleges as partners and advancing the skills and education level of our workforce. So I'm really pleased to have Sarah Yuntis here to help share some of the work that's been going on through that partnership. So Jocelyn, I'm going to turn it over to you to run the show here. Most of this falls under Jocelyn and her team, who've done a phenomenal job, both kind of planning out the long-term and the shorter-term strategy. And Jocelyn's also done a terrific job building the capacity of her team to focus on the different aspects, building new roles to address some of the needs that we have, and bringing in new partners. So Jocelyn, thank you for your leadership and work. I'm excited to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Happy to have the opportunity to have this discussion. I just wanted to check, should I share the slides, or Addison, will you be doing that?
I'm sharing the slides.
Okay, great. I think we're ready to roll. So we have, I think the Commissioner laid out the agenda pretty well. I think I'll just start by contextualizing sort of where these different pieces of the agenda fit into our overall workforce strategy. That is slide 6, I think, maybe, Addison. So I think this figure should be familiar to people at this point, but I find it's just a helpful touch point in thinking about, sort of how we're locating the work that we're talking about, and, keeping an eye on the 4 priority strategies that we're using to build towards a field that's growing, both in terms of the number of educators coming into the field, but also growth in professional skills across educators in the field, and opportunities for advancement. Today, we're going to focus in on thinking about both the ways we're supporting people entering and moving through the field, and focusing in on some of the work we've done thinking about apprenticeship programs, and then also looking at the ways in which we are partnering with higher ed and coordinating with higher ed around access to higher education and opportunities. So both thinking about the changes that the Commissioner mentioned to the scholarship program, but also looking forward to giving Sarah Yunits a chance to speak about the partnership that we have with the Mass Association of Community Colleges and the work that they're doing in partnership with our Career Pathways grantees around building both the accessibility of some of the work that's happening across the Career Pathways grantees, as well as the ways that we're thinking about integrating opportunities to use credit for prior learning to support educators in building towards certifications and degrees. So can we go to the next slide? So starting by focusing in on what we've been doing around thinking about apprenticeships, I think some of this information is review for many of you, but we've been thinking about starting by really trying to understand in both the center-based space and the family childcare space, what's happening with apprenticeships across the state and in other states. There's a lot of work going on right now and interest in this. I think obviously in response to the need to think creatively and in new ways about bringing educators into the field and supporting educators and continuing and staying and progressing, but also hearing from those who are doing this work on the ground right now about what's been working, and also where are the challenges in doing this work, and where is there space for EEC to take steps to improve the coordination and the funding of some of these systems. So we are in the process of working with neighborhood villages, running 3 different center-based apprenticeship convenings. We've had 2 so far. We're working on another one in December. And these have been a great opportunity to bring people together who are working in supporting apprenticeships in different ways, from those running programs where apprentices are working to those who are supporting some of the training opportunities and the coordination of the apprenticeships. Also, connecting with our peers at the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development. And, I think people just have had a great time sharing what they've been doing and having a chance to talk to each other, as well as I think we've been learning a great deal about what's working well in that space and where, there really are some important and positive practices happening that we should support, but also in the places where there are gaps in the supports available and things that could be improved. At the same time, we've spent the last few years, partly with support from Mary Kay Leonard and Peg Sprague, and talking with FCC educators, talking with FCC systems, and really trying to understand the support system for FCC educators, both coming into the field and also staying and advancing within the field. And also look to see what's happening around FCC apprenticeships in other states. Where are there opportunities to support FCC apprenticeships? And I think in having these conversations, we've identified a couple of areas of focus. One is thinking about ways to incentivize the development of apprenticeship models, and also to recognize the importance of registered apprenticeships in this ecosystem and the ways in which we can think about better supporting the use of that particular approach, as well as using the resources that come with that approach to better support the system as a whole that's focused on the particular needs of the EEC, or the early education and care workforce. And then also thinking about funding. I mean, obviously funding is always a constant. And I think we have got some fairly specific feedback about particular funding needs that we could consider. You can go to the next slide. And also just calling out, there are a few people here that participated as well. So as I'm talking, I'm happy for others to jump in and, add thoughts that seem important if I'm missing anything. So on the center-based side, starting here, what we've been learning from these conversations that we've been having is, first of all, running an apprentice program is a complex operation. When you start by just thinking about what has to happen at a program site that is hosting apprenticeships, there is a recognition that we need to recruit apprentices into the program. We need to find a space that is funded for them to operate in the classroom. They need mentors and supports in the classroom, as well as access to training opportunities, which includes support in finding and registering for the appropriate training opportunities, support in continuing along, career guidance. So both in the program, and then also, there's some implications for the partners as well. It's complex, it's time consuming, and it needs support both to start up, but also to sustain these operations. And they're also, when you think about it from the perspective of an employer, and the employers and educators that will take advantage of apprenticeships as they move into paid positions, there are expectations that there will be wage increases, particularly in a registered apprenticeship. There's need for funding for mentors, and their need to build the relationships and the lines of communication that support apprenticeships and moving from their apprenticeship into a job. which may be in the same program, but it could also be in a different program. So there's a lot of infrastructure and coordination needed to make this possible and to support the operations in ways that, isn't unsustainable for programs in particular. Can you go to the next slide? Specifically around funding, we've received some very useful and fairly specific feedback on some of the places where funding is needed. In particular, in thinking about the costs that programs who are running apprenticeships and hosting apprenticeships have, there are some gaps. So when you think about overall the funding needs, there are just the cost of staffing, and some of this obviously is incorporated into the compensation already being provided to the staff. But additionally, apprenticeships do get some stipends and funding for themselves. Running these programs requires educators to serve as mentors, which does require extra payment and stipends for the educator for that part of the process. And there's an administrative level, so both the educational leadership that needs to be in place to ensure that a program is really functioning effectively as a professional learning site is an important piece of that. And then there is also just the administration that's necessary. And all of these pieces are additive to people's current jobs. There's the cost of the training or other types of coursework that apprenticeships participate in. Again, we do fund a fair amount, and there are many low-cost opportunities of scholarships available for access to higher education courses. But all of that does require educators to be supported in accessing those funded resources. So there is coordination needed. And then in addition, there's sort of all the extra costs that still remain for anybody participating in these things, the cost of materials and books, the technology needed to participate. If you're moving to a CDA, there are costs associated with meeting the requirements of the CDA. And there are other types of wraparound supports that we know educators need to participate, like childcare, transportation, some of those additional pieces that are critical for people to access these things, but aren't necessarily the first thing that we think about when we think specifically about the training itself. So it's very clear that it's important that there is flexible funding available that can be used to address all of these different additive costs that programs face in running apprenticeships. Go to the next slide. I've also called out that mentors are really an important part of that. And I think that while, because in an early ed classroom, you have groups of teachers working together, there's always been sort of an informal mentorship structure. But serving as a mentor really is a very different role than just teaching children, and it does require a particular skill set. And mentors are key to the success of an apprenticeship program. So there has been a lot of interest in both recruiting and then supporting educators into moving into mentorship roles. We've seen a growth in training program. But again, these are, I think there's a desire for some guidance and consistency around what the training program should look like. And also, there really isn't a reason that 5 different entities across the state would start from scratch and create their own program. But there's an opportunity, I think, to provide structure and guidance around what that should look like. And then also, we see that there's leadership training and community of practice that are also available to support the leadership level and thinking about how they can support mentors and apprenticeships in their programs as well. The recruitment is also an area that there could be additional support. Typically, mentors are found within programs, and I think there's been discussion about does the apprentice have to have the teacher that they're working with be their mentor? Is a mentor who moves around and supports multiple classes in a program the best way to do it? But I think generally there's a sense that it is helpful to have a mentor on site, obviously. So thinking about the ways in which we're supporting the field and seeing mentorship opportunities is something that's beneficial, and recruiting mentors is important. And I think all of this drives towards, in the long term, it's certainly going to be important that we think about the ways in which we're setting industry standards for the mentorship role. And part of this could be thinking about the ways in which the credential that we're developing defines roles and responsibilities and competencies for this level of skills, and also then could potentially be tied to increased compensation that is integrated into the compensation for the role rather than being driven by stipends. But for the moment, the industry standards, the development of training and the provision of stipends and ongoing supports for mentors is certainly something that we can think about also supporting. You go to the next slide. And then on the FCC side, I think what is interesting when you think about how this translates into the FCC space, particularly when you're thinking about apprenticeships for novice educators and bringing in novice educators into the field. For FCC educators, this really is hand in glove with supporting FCC educators and starting a new program. So when you think about what's required, it's both support in understanding how to enter a field and start a business, including meeting ECE's licensing requirements, but then also building the skills that are needed to both run a high quality program and do all the things that we are also training center-based educators to do, but it also includes the skills needed to manage and run a financially stable program. So in thinking about the different areas of support and training that we've heard about, there's support in navigating ECE systems and the regulations. There's some technology needs that are associated with both integrating with the ECE, but also the basic financial management and program administration. There's all of the materials and resources necessary on the education side to run the program, such as identifying curriculum, assessments, screeners, materials for the classroom, the skill set and needed to engage in families, and also just sort of some of the basic processes around how you communicate with families effectively and support them in understanding what you're offering and the policies of the program that you're developing, and the business management side of the picture as well. And in thinking about how to provide all of these, it's important to recognize the linguistic, cultural, and ethnic diversity of the workforce. This is particularly true for FCC educators, but it certainly is true across the field as well. So when we sort of drill these down into where ECE could focus, there's sort of two parts of the process that require attention, and what is provided at each stage is slightly different. So thinking about how you might engage with FCC's educators interested in entering the field and from an apprenticeship context starts with thinking about what happens before the program opens, and how do you support educators in understanding how to get licensed, how to set up a business, how to get all the materials necessary, how to build the technology. But also, it's an opportunity to connect, just as we're doing with center-based educators, but for FCCs to connect FCC apprentice educators with a current FCC educator who can serve as a mentor, and starting that process early on. And then there's also funding. So the extent to which we can provide startup funds or training stipends to support FCCs in this early stage of the process before they have a program open. And then once the program's opened, it's important that the supports continue for a period of time afterwards. So thinking about what the ongoing training is that's available, and whether there's any specific coaching that might be useful and supportive in those early days, continuing the relationship with the mentor so that support is sustained as programs are opened and the work begins, and identifying a role. We call it an FCC specialist here, but who can support ongoing goal setting and reflection on the part of the educator to think about, sort of what are their needs, where are they going, how are they building and growing as a professional, and supporting access to resources as well for the educator on that pathway. Go to the next slide. So pulling all of this together to think about, sort of in broad terms, where are we identifying areas of focus for EEC? The first is clearly funding, and the need for flexible grant funding that can go to programs supporting apprenticeships on site, to think about the ways in which we're supporting educators and mentors, any additional staffing or administrative support needed, additional costs around training, the support for the educational leaders, the wraparound supports that we talk about. And I think we're thinking about this both in terms of the way grants can go to centers, but also the role that systems could potentially play in this world. And then also thinking about the targeted enhancements that we might consider for the overall apprenticeship infrastructure itself. So considering the ways in which coordination of recruitment, which I think, JD, goes to your comment, training, placements. How do we support the system as a whole in these things so individual programs are not necessarily having to scramble and do all of this work for themselves? And one opportunity that is in place to think about how we might do this is the intermediary structure. We have been talking with some of our colleagues at EOLWD around the possibility of funding intermediaries in the early education space. And that is certainly a way of providing some centralized support for some of the coordination and infrastructure that is necessary to make these apprenticeships effective and efficient across the field. And then also thinking about the ways in which EEC is a very particular field with particular needs, and the ways in which we can ensure that the training and other types of supports are available. Mentor training, I think, being the particular example of this. And as you can see here, is an area that we're really wanting to think very intentionally and carefully about. So both in terms of how do we develop mentor trainings, but then how do we also incentivize, support, and recruit educator participation, and providing resources for that as well. And then finally, all of this obviously isn't happening in a vacuum. This work is very interconnected with other work that we're doing across the agency. I mentioned this briefly, but it's really essential to think about the ways in which we're coordinating the development of any apprenticeship work with the ongoing development of the new credential itself. So one example is thinking about where would mentor expectations fit into our current credential. We're also thinking about the ways in which the competencies can inform the types of tasks that are expected of apprenticeships when they're working on site. And part of this is continued collaboration with the Labor and Workforce Department around all of these pieces, both the intermediaries, the opportunities to use registered apprenticeships, but also thinking about the ways in which the credential can be developed, keeping in mind the types of expectations that are best aligned to support that type of work. And finally, and this is in some ways a segue to the next section of this, but partnerships with community colleges are obviously a very important part of this work, and work that we will continue to focus on, but also include attention to what's happening on the apprenticeship side as we think about where we are going with community colleges. So that's it for my presentation. I think maybe, Addison, we can stop sharing for a few minutes and get thoughts, feedbacks, reactions to that. I don't know if you have anything that you want to add, or Heidi, having participated in some of this.
This is JD. Just a question for you and Sarah from Neighborhood Villages. Sarah, the program that you guys are doing together, the apprenticeship program, where are you sourcing your apprentices from? How does that pipeline look at the front end as you're bringing people into the profession?
This was a Neighborhood Villages question?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer that then.
Okay.
So we have 2 apprenticeship programs. We have a lead teacher apprenticeship and a director apprenticeship. Both are for educators that are in the field. So we actually haven't been recruiting from outside the field, bringing people in. We've been sort of upskilling current educators within the field. And really for apprenticeships, because there's such a need for employer buy-in, like they have to agree to the time that they need to spend with the mentor, to the wage bumps, to sustaining the wage increase after they graduate. We're really doing targeted outreach to employers, not to educators. And so it's a different strategy where we're creating partnerships with employers and then asking them to sort of nominate educators that would be a right fit, nominate a mentor, but they have to buy into the whole program first. So it's really employer outreach that we're doing.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
If I could just jump in, and I want to apologize for running late, but certainly where I jumped into the presentation, certainly appreciated and validated 100%, more so from my previous role at the YWCA, where we had started and had a grant through DOL to start an apprenticeship model. And certainly in thinking about and everything that you cited in terms of the need and the support, and similarly to Neighborhood Villages, really recruiting within our very new workforce, which I think a lot of providers are seeing to be able to build out that model. The couple points that I think were challenging, again, this was a couple of years ago now, starting it out, and haven't been there for a little while now, but Certainly looking at the mentors, and I know you mentioned reference the stipends for mentors, but considering at least starting the program, it was admin staff that were serving in that capacity, who of course are, in addition to being in the classroom themselves so very often, also managing a whole lot of additional capacity. So really looking through of kind of where the right mentors, who the right mentors would be, and how we're supporting them and being able to provide this additional supports to the educators. The other piece too is, and I don't know if I missed it, if you referenced it earlier, but I think a big piece that that including with the mentors is master teacher support, and helping to be able to make sure that we're through that professional development, that the educator is getting access, and the YW is able to partner in the community to have a master teacher in the classroom as part of the program to be able to help through that as well. So just wanted to kind of flag that component. And then want to give a shout out to Quinsigamond Community College. I know you mentioned the partnership, but the YW through the Worcester portion of this certainly had a partnership with Quinsig to be able to help with the credentialing piece of it. So that certainly raised the community college piece. The other component I would just add in is certainly our vocational programs that are graduating students with early education and care certificates. So certainly just another place to JD's point about a potential pipeline, which would be perfect to start into an apprenticeship model after high school graduation. So thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you. Heidi?
Thanks. I have just more logistical questions, and I'm curious about how much time the apprentice and the mentors are spending, and what type of training. Is the training in person? Is the training virtual? And how that all looks and operates for the different models. As I try to think about, I'd love to have people on my team and others in my community participate in something, in an apprenticeship concept, but as a program administrator, how would I need to coordinate the time for training, as far as, are they paid for the training, and all of those types of logistical questions, and how do they fit into the model?
Yeah, so I think those are the pieces, like really the answer to your questions is what I feel like we should be, that's our task right now, is thinking about, okay, how do we make it feasible for somebody like you to bring a mentor on board? Mm-hmm. How do we support you in funding the stipends and the cost of the mentor? Because I think particularly if you're talking about entry level mentors, this is somebody who's additive to the staffing that you already have to run the classroom, or not. It isn't a role that's integrated into that. And so then there's staffing schedules around making sure there's access to the coursework, the training that they need to do. But then, again, I think, and Robin, your point was interesting, because they're really, we talk about mentors in sort of a unitary way, but I think the piece that I am hearing is that there's sort of layers of support that are needed within the program. So you have the teacher who's in the classroom with the apprentice. You called them master teachers, like that person could also be sort of a formal mentor, but that might just be a master teacher that's supporting the educator. And then there's a mentor or coach or somebody else coming in to support them. But thinking about, sort of, are those folks that we're supporting within your program? Do you have teachers that you would want who are very experienced, that might appreciate additional compensation to take on some additional responsibilities like that? Or is that something that we need to sort of build an infrastructure of people who are available to do it? It's probably a mix in the beginning. But I think that's helpful just to map out on a very pragmatic level what some of the decisions and thinking about, like, what might we support to make that possible. And I know on the registered apprenticeship side, and Bill, you'll know these numbers, I think, but there are actually sort of hour requirements around how much time an apprentice spends doing different things.
Yeah, there's a number of hours, and it depends on which apprenticeship it is. Like for our CDA apprenticeship, for example, there's 150 hours of training, 2,000 hours of on-the-job learning. It's all sort of built into when you register it. And, we know this has been one of the challenges, is providers being able to provide that time for apprentices and mentors to meet, because coverage is so hard to begin with. And so we've tried to be really flexible, and the mentors have been really flexible. We also, and you bring up such a good example, Heidi, of providers that maybe have an apprentice that don't have a mentor on site. So then we have mentors from other sites, and like, how does that work or maybe not work? What are the advantages to that? And then what are the challenges to that? And Jocelyn, just to loop back to your presentation, I think it's really cool to see from somebody who implements programs, sort of how this is being leveled up in a systems thinking, and like all the pieces that you shared definitely reflect all the feedback that was given in the convening, are very, you know, represent all the challenges and things that we've been thinking about, but really appreciate sort of taking that in a systems approach and the partnership with EEC and EOLWD, because as we sort of create this program and have competencies, it's helpful to know that they align with credential competencies, so educators aren't experiencing two different things. So it's really helpful to see that alignment and that systems thinking around these programs.
And just calling out from the comments, I think JD, we talked about your comment, but also the point that there's not a funding source to support brand new candidates coming into the field. And I think that's sort of two pieces. I mean, it's thinking about, you know, if you're treating them as an apprentice once they're in, how does the stipend or salary for an apprentice in the classroom get paid? But there's also the recruitment costs and the ways in which we support the system to bring people in, and definitely seconding what I've heard about, you know, thinking about opportunities to bring in high school students. Also, you know, I know Head Start has really focused on thinking about where there might be parents as their kids age up that might be interested in moving in to working in the early ed space as well. So I think there are a number of areas that we can think about how to draw on. All right, then I think we can go back to the deck, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Cian to talk about where we are with some improvements on the scholarship.
Before we jump over, I think Jessica has her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't see it. Apologize. Thank you for catching that. Jessica? I wonder if there are sound issues.
No, I'm here. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I just wanted to give some feedback about FCC educators, and thank you for your presentation and the feedback that that I hear. A question that I had was, is this apprenticeship already happening in FCCs?
There are other states that have FCC apprenticeships, and there is certainly work being done to include FCC apprenticeships in Massachusetts. I definitely wouldn't say it's as developed as some of the work that's being done in the center base, but I also, what I was trying to call out in the presentation is I think that there are many different things that might not be called apprenticeships, but are moving us in that direction as well. All the work that's being done in different places to support FCCs in entering the field, and I know that there's a fair amount of that going on, really do sort of fall into this broader category. And I think part of what we want to think about is ways to think about how do we bring the apprenticeship frame to that and bring the efforts that we're thinking about supporting so that they're applied across both center-based and FCC opportunities.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Leslie Baker calls out that they have been working with FCCs and Project Flourish.
Okay, so some considerations that I have as a family childcare provider based on your presentation, navigating EEC systems, and I've heard from speakers talking about buy-in from the field and buy-in from employers and things of that sort. I think that there's a high level of providers wanting to work with EEC. I just think it needs to make sense. I also am worried about asking employers who are already exhausted of running small businesses to take on more. So really what I would consider this would be a support, not something that we're implementing directly into the programs. Also in regards to regulations, something that I saw, we just had actually a licensed assistant come to interview, and she didn't speak English, which in our space does not work because a lot of our parents do speak primarily English. So just thinking about how are we thinking about technology in regards to the primary languages that are being spoken, and how can we incorporate technology with the curriculum and assessment, and making that an easy transition where we're not trying to retrain or refocus. And also just listening to what we're actually already doing or implementing. Like I use a lot of Google Docs. I do emails. Like there's a lot of things that I already have templates of, and I'm sure that other providers have templates of. So what I would think of from my point of view is how are we creating pathways of retention and not just recruitment? Because I don't hear anything about retention. I think there's a lot of licensed assistants that actually want to become providers and want to move forward and want to grow these spaces and have the capacity and the capability and are already in the spaces. So before we continue to recruit, I would just hold us back for 1 second and think also reflective of how we're being reflective and strategic about keeping the people who are already licensed and working in the spaces before more people leave our space. And then I also think that technology, curriculum, and all those things are kind of hand in hand nowadays. A lot of families are busy, a lot of people are busy. So really thinking about how we can use that more effectively. And then the business management, I also think it's like a whole other animal. So something I think should have its own focus and really seeing what is working and what is being used. A lot of what I've been seeing or what I've been having to do is outsource myself and hire apps and pay all these extra subscriptions and things of that sort that, you know, if we could just make it a little bit easier through Google or things that are free for providers and not, you know, trying to reinvent a wheel. I also wish that we are a little bit more reflective of what is DESE doing and what are those guidelines and really aligning ourselves with all levels of education, higher education, elementary, and things of that sort. So we're really creating foundations of education, which we're already doing, but being more intentional of those partnerships. So I thank you for your presentation, and it looks great. And whatever you guys need, I'm here for you guys.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think, I mean, your point about retention is a really important one. All your points are important one. Let me start there. But I wanted to call out a few thoughts around retention too, because I think Beanal talked about using apprenticeships both for entry, but also for ongoing learning and growth. And I think that's a very real and important part of the system. I think the other piece, and this is reflected in Leslie's comment too, is just that thinking about structuring this for FCC educators, the structures look a little more, they're different than the structures we would have in the center-based space, and they don't fit as neatly into some of the things like a registered apprenticeship program. So I think that's a place where there's some work that we can do as well to build systems that work, but also thinking about ways in which we can explore supporting people both entry and sustaining them in the field and continuing the professional growth. Addison, anyone else before? Nope. All right, Sarah.
Thanks, Addison. Jocelyn. Hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Cian, and I am a workforce development specialist at EEC, and I oversee our partnership with DHE around the Early Childhood Educator Scholarship. And I also oversee the Career Pathways Grant with the community colleges. And so today I'm going to talk about the scholarship. We have been working, I would say, for the greater part of a year now, really digging deep into the pieces of the scholarship, looking at data, thinking about what's working, what's not working. We went through a cycle of the scholarship while we were doing this work. And so we've come up with some thoughts. So just to ground this a little bit, the Early Childhood Educator Scholarship was established in 2006 in the state budget with $1 million in pilot funding. And at that time, there was really a push in early childhood to be getting associates and bachelors for all early childhood educators. And so the scholarship was meant to really support that. It's still going on today, and it's still intended to increase the number of early educators with college degrees, therefore hoping to improve the quality of care that's provided in programs. In FY24, the legislature earmarked $5 million for the ECE Scholarship in a Department of Higher Ed line item. And this year we have, the application just closed in mid-November. We have awarded over 500 scholarships, and we're still currently working through the last applicant, so I don't have an exact number for you, but over 500. And this is an increase of probably close to 100 over the number that was awarded last year. Next slide, please, Addison. So as the commissioner said, the program is administered by the Office of Student Financial Assistance at the Department of Higher Ed in collaboration with us at EEC. The way the scholarship works is that applicants get a per credit rate depending on the type of institution that they apply to, and then the funds can be used toward their matriculated degree program for an associate's, bachelor's, or master's degree. So unlike our work in the career pathway space, this is really just a financial, not just, but really a financial assistance piece where applicants have the choice of what degree they want to get, what school they want to go to, and then they apply and can use the scholarship in conjunction with other financial assistance pieces to fund their higher ed work. So applicants can receive funding for a maximum of three courses per semester, because there is a 20-hour-a-week work requirement. Applicants must be working in the field for at least 20 hours a week while pursuing their education. And we do an application cycle that starts on April 1st. And at that time is when people apply for the upcoming fall, the following spring, and the summer. So that's just some context. What we did was dig into all of the pieces of the scholarship, talking to people who had used it and whatnot, and have some proposed updates that we are currently working on in collaboration with the Department of Higher Ed. So one thing that we know that was a barrier and a roadblock for some people was that the review process included a double employment verification and was very lengthy. And so notifications didn't always go out until sometimes later than people wanted to know what their funding source was. So we have been working on that. And in the next cycle, this one's already sort of in place, there will be only a single employment verification used by the proof of employment letter that applicants have to upload. And so this will allow quicker review process time, and we will be working on a system of rolling notifications so that when you are approved, you will get your letter of contingent funding at a sooner date so that you have more time to plan for September. We are also looking into the award amounts. Currently, the scholarship covers only tuition, and you can see there how much per credit is awarded at each of the different types of institutions. So we're looking into what are the current rates per credit at different institutions to make sure that the scholarship is keeping up funding the credits at the appropriate rate. We're also looking into ways that the funding can be used to cover other institutional fees and course materials that applicants would have to pay for. So we're trying to expand the use of the funding and hoping to give some more financial relief to people. And thirdly, one of the stumbling blocks for part of our population, the out-of-school time educators, is that currently the majors that you're required to have to be eligible for the scholarship are very early childhood based. As you can see, they're all written out there, and there are some general ones, yet early childhood development has to be named as a specific area of inquiry. So we are looking into how we can adjust that, what majors might need to be added, what wording might need to be added to open up the opportunity for more of our out-of-school time providers to make it more relevant to their work. So, the scholarship is open to family child care providers, early educators, and out-of-school time providers. And so we're really working to make it inclusive of all of those groups. So more to come as we continue our work with DHE and get some of these things rolling. We're looking forward to the next start of the cycle in April and to a smoother and easier, more accessible process for folks.
Thank you, Sarah. Any comments or questions on the scholarship pieces? You know?
Hi, thanks, Sarah. I know how much work the scholarship is, so really appreciate everything you're doing. And I think it's such a tremendous resource for the field. I have three questions / comment. One is the FAFSA is required as part of the application, but it's not an income-based scholarship. And I think that's still a little bit confusing to the field. I'm still hearing from some people, and I'm always telling them, no, don't worry, it's not income, apply, go. But they get stuck at the FAFSA step because they think when they get that email from FAFSA that says you're not eligible, they're done. So if that could just be like really, really pronounced and communicated so that people don't get turned away, because they should utilize it.
That's a good point.
The second piece I was going to add is it's so incredible that OST is being added in the field for scholarships. Really appreciate that. I know that was some advocacy done. I also would love to consider other areas, like I'm thinking specifically mental health and degrees around mental health, and that there's a need for this in the field. And if there could be a way, if somebody's working in a program as an infant mental health consultant and getting a degree in psychology, could the scholarship support them in a way? And then, because that's such a need, I'm thinking of that first and foremost, but then to even start to expand beyond that, because we know we need family engagement specialists. We know we have business operations people in the field. And so like, how can we keep those really important positions and also support them in their degree attainment and professional development building, maybe through the scholarship eventually? And then the third thing I was going to ask is a very logistical question. Why is it closed in November? Because we have people that want to apply now, and I'm like, oh, you have to wait till April. Is it a capacity thing?
That's a really good question, and I'll have to dig into that a little bit more. You have people that want to apply now for spring?
Yeah, like that. I don't want to lose them between now and April, right? Where I'm like, hold on, wait till April, and you know how it goes. Or people are like, oh, maybe by then, for whatever reason, they don't. But you can get into an associate's program, not necessarily always in the fall, like sort of in January or in the spring, and there's different timelines for that. So I was just curious if there's a reason that it's cut off.
It's a really great question. I can dig into that a little bit with DHE and try to find out more. And let's stay in touch, because there might be something we can look into what we can provide for those people. But thanks for all those points. They're really, really helpful as we continue the work with DHE for us to take under consideration.
Yeah, I know we've expanded the timeline significantly over the years in working with DHE, and there's been a lot of flexibility around that. There is some expectation of closing this out to sort of reflect the fiscal year, but I don't know why it's November. So that's definitely something we could look into. And it's helpful to know that people are interested in starting for the spring.
Yeah.
Heidi?
Those are great suggestions, Beanal. I just wanted to jump in too, because I think, thinking about early education and care staff, which have been so hard to find, not just the educators. And I think it's another area of sort of updating from the original thinking. And Sarah, I think didn't start by saying this, but like this has been underutilized, and we've also given back funding, which is a terrible shame when we have so many educators who could benefit from it. So I think part of these changes are really about making sure, and also people haven't been able to get all the way through because of the limits on the fees and the tuition, or giving up because they don't find out in time for enrollment and they're not going to pay for it themselves if they're not getting a scholarship. So really trying to make sure that we're getting people, keeping them, and then keep enabling them. And this will play a little bit into the next agenda item, but we also, we have an opportunity to really link up our career pathways with the higher education scholarship in a really intentional way, so that if folks are enrolled in our career pathways program at the community colleges, we're paving the way for them to continue on to the four-year schools by supporting them with technical assistance around the scholarship. So making the programs work together in a way that they have, but not as tight and as intentionally. And I do want to just highlight, Sarah said in the beginning, I think we had 300 participate last year, and this year we had 500. And we did a lot of, we did open sessions in multiple languages. We did a lot of outreach. So without even making a single change to what we knew were barriers in the program, we were able to increase the number of folks participating just by making sure people knew about it. So that's something we'll obviously continue to do too. And then when we are able to make the changes, I think those two things together will be really good. And yeah, I see Lisa Hughes putting Mass Reconnect is going to be a nice match for our population. So adult learners who may not have gone on to college and are working in early education programs, so really connecting the Mass Reconnect program to our workforce will be a great benefit too. So Sarah, I want to thank you for your work on this. It's not easy to work across systems to try and bring improvement. So
I actually was sort of wondering about the impact of Mass Reconnect. I know that, and not only in getting people into community colleges, but does that free up money that might be able to be allocated to something else? And how might that be able to be? I think it's an opportunity to sort of rethink some of the career pathways and some of the other concepts as far as funding goes. I love the idea of providing additional training for people who are working on a social work degree or other types of degrees that are incredibly versatile and utilized in our early learning spaces. So that was really sort of my question was, is there a way to shift some of the thinking and strategize differently? And I did notice that Jessica had her hand up as well. I think because she doesn't have her camera working, that it's harder to see, but her hand is now down, so she might be good at this point.
So
Okay.
Sarah Young just might be able to also address some of the Mass Reconnect when we get to her part of the presentation. Jessica, did you want to jump in here? I did see your hand up too. And then Michelle.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because I'm teaching an undergrad class at UMass Boston. And I have heard some interests of students in the undergrad level about, what are the distinctions. So just I think somebody said, just being very clear about, where students need to be when they are applying, I think is important. Also considerations that I think about as a current instructor is the workload and the commitment to the scholarship and things of that sort being very clear. I think that's very important. And then I wonder, as a committee member, how can we connect this as an apprenticeship opportunity? I feel like a lot of students are going to school and then they have to find a job at a center base. It's why can't the center base be the same place that they're also getting their accreditation and the mentorship and the opportunity? So just thinking of how we can circulate the workforce, and not just the workforce, but the students currently in this space. I do see students very excited about working in education. And I think the last point I wanted to say was, I think, Sarah, it's a great idea to expand. I have students in psychology taking early education classes, and I have a student that's currently a historian also. So my last point was, how can we also be more strategic about bringing men into the field and bringing diversity of gender and race and culture. Thank you for everybody pointing out that my hand was raised and went back down.
Thanks, Jessica. Michelle?
Thanks. Just going back to what Jessica just said and what Binal said earlier around kind of expanding the degree types, and completely agree with the lack of mental health professionals, both within our programs and clinicians outside our programs to refer to and to work with children, deeply needed in our pipeline, as are our teachers. I apologize if this is too in the weeds for this conversation, but are there allowances around kind of creating requirements in the grant for remaining with an early childhood provider for 1 or 2 years after degree and things like that, around, particularly when it's a degree outside of the very direct early childhood degrees, when it's psychology or social work or some other degree that we need, but we want to make sure they stay in early childhood serving professions? Is that allowable?
Well, it is part of the requirements. When you fill out the application, you are asked to consent to some terms, and one of the terms is remaining in the field. I believe it's for the same number of semesters that you use the scholarship. It definitely depends on how long,
in addition to when you're in
addition to, right, after you finish your education. So yes, Michelle, that is part of the terms and requirements.
If that's the case, then expanding it is something very much.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. This has been really, really helpful. I appreciate the feedback. You can all feel free to reach out to me if you have other comments or feedback, because as we've all said, we are currently working on all these things with our partners at DHE and really want to make the opportunity reflective of what the field needs. And so happy to hear from people their ideas, and really appreciate everybody's feedback today.
Sarah. And now we can turn it over to Sarah Units from the Mass Association of Community Colleges.
If I can just say for the record, there are so many Sarahs in this room right now, in this virtual room. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Units. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Mass Association of Community Colleges. I am really happy to be here and talk to you about not only the work that we've done over the last year, but really where we're going from here. And before I get started, I would just say, I do think that this has been foundational in terms of building some really important partnerships with our community colleges and EEC. Next slide, please.
And Sarah, I just want to mention, I think I might have seen Brian Gold. I don't know if he was on this morning or this afternoon, but you're probably going to mention this, but we worked closely with Early Childhood Funders Collaborative and the Mass Association of Community Colleges to get some funding to support sort of additional work and arms and legs and staffing to support this work. So I want to thank our funders. And I think Lydia and Malora are here, and I know they were part of that too. So from Commonwealth Children's Fund. So just, it's been important to have sort of external resources to help support this work instead of just adding it on to somebody's existing job, which I think had been a little bit of a holdup. Yes, now here you are with your existing job doing it, but they catalyzed that.
Thank you, Commissioner. You beat me to it. I did see Brian on here, and he and I talked several times this week and last. So thank you to the Funding Collaborative for funding this work. I will get into kind of how we got here and where we're going in a second. Addison, if you could go to the next slide. I apologize. I had planned on driving. I'm usually the one who drives. So, so I will do my best here. So I think you are all well aware that we have 15 community colleges in Massachusetts. This is a visual of the service areas, just so that you can see kind of what that landscape is. I really wanted to put this map up here to note that all 15 of our schools have early educator programs, but each one is structured slightly differently, in part because our schools meet the regional needs of the regional workforce, both from a childcare perspective or an early education perspective, as well as the workforce perspective. So I think it's important to remember that what the needs are in Berkshire County versus what the needs are in Plymouth County aren't always in full alignment. And that's why the community colleges are structured the way that they are. So before I go on to the next slide, for anyone who's unfamiliar with what our organization does, we work on behalf of the 15 schools. We work for them to establish and implement statewide initiatives and to convene stakeholders that's at the campus level and externally to reach shared goals. So our office is focused on maintaining a high-level strategic focus to support projects that can impact student outcomes and support the Commonwealth's goals in areas like workforce development. Next slide, please. So I just want to spend 1 minute going through the timeline here. It's a bit of a long one. And to look back kind of from where we started is an interesting exercise. Back in June of 22, we started having conversations, our office and some of our campus leads with EEC around the standardization of curriculum, credentialing, and credit for prior learning. At the time, there'd been a series of personnel changes at our office, at EEC, at some of our schools. And it really felt like a good time to bring everyone together to discuss where we were going to go. So as the commissioner mentioned, over the next several months, in consultation with EEC, we developed a proposal to hire a part-time 1-year EEC workforce liaison. And this person has been tasked with building a system-wide process for awarding credit for work in the field, building statewide career pathways, and exploring opportunities to streamline early educator credentialing. I think Wendy is also on the call. She started with us in December of 22 and is just about to round out her 1 year with us. So in March of this year, we began regular meetings with representatives from each of the 15 schools. And in October, we submitted a draft report on credit for prior learning specifically. That is what I'm going to touch on a little bit in the next few slides. And then I want to talk more about strategically where we're going to go next. Before I move on to the next thing, are there any questions? Great. Thank you. Addison, you can actually go to the next slide as well. So I think one of the most important things that I want to note here is the importance around team building. As you can imagine, with 15 schools and different individuals playing different roles at each of those schools, getting the right people in the room was really a key piece of getting some of this work right. And I also want to note the importance of that going forward. I can't overstate the importance of that relationship building, both on our campuses and with some of the folks in this room. So when we started, we'd originally asked for 1 point of contact from each school. The idea was to get a broad range of voices in the room. We learned pretty quickly that there were some communication challenges with that. And soon we kind of expanded the group to make sure that the right folks were in the room. Let me see. So one more slide ahead, please. So this is the work around credit for prior learning. You know, we really spent a lot of time figuring out which direction to go in. And EEC was working on the credentialing piece kind of holistically alongside the credit for prior learning work that we took on. For anyone unfamiliar with credit for prior learning, it grants college credit for prior work experience. This is a valuable tool to acknowledge students' past work experience, and it can both speed the time needed to get a degree, as well as lower the cost for students. Specifically in the area of early childhood education, each school has had a different, process and plan in place for awarding CPL. One of the goals in undertaking this work was to get closer to a consistent framework where a student at, say, Quinsigamond and a student at Middlesex could earn the same credit for the same work experience. Excuse me. More broadly, we did focus our work on developing a framework for colleges to initiate CPL if they did not already have one, expand it if they did, and review the assessment methods used around credit for prior learning. Ultimately, the report that we submitted in October and the final report that is coming in the next week or two provides a framework for colleges to award credit for prior learning, specifically for introduction to early childhood education. This course was selected because it's one of the 4 ECE foundational courses with student learning outcomes that are already aligned across the 15 schools. So while the majority of our schools have expressed a willingness to implement the framework, it's important to note that the plan has to go through the appropriate internal governance processes or curriculum changes at our schools. Any questions about credit for prior learning before we talk about next steps? I will note I cannot see the chat while I run through these slides, so I apologize. Okay, great. So here's, I think the most important piece here is about next steps. So once we get CPL implemented in January, I will note that one of our deans is convening her colleagues So deans, ECE program coordinators, and career pathway leads to discuss the development of a foundational certificate. This was another goal of the work we originally set out to do, and we're excited to see progress there. Next, it's my hope that our office can meet with EEC and then ultimately with our campus teams to develop strategic shared priorities for the next year, specifically around workforce challenges. And also not on my slide here, the dovetail of Mass Reconnect and what this does for this field is something that I think is very exciting. We are also in the process of developing a plan to possibly implement free community college for all, and figuring out how those things overlay with the field is a really exciting next step. Any questions for me about this work?
Sarah, what would be a timeline for credit for prior learning? And is that something that would happen like one school at a time or statewide? How would that, I know each of the campuses are different, so.
So now that we've got the framework together, we will essentially turn it over to our campuses to implement. Each school's governance process around curriculum changes is a little bit different. So while yes, it will likely go individually school by school, our campuses have been involved in the development of it, and I see no hesitation around it beyond just the formal process of making it go through.
I have a question, and apologies if you said this already. My sound was cutting out a little bit and I had to restart. So really excited to hear about the consistent credit for prior learning. This is a nuanced question, but are there like differences in credit for prior learning in CDA versus like more credit for a registered apprenticeship? And I'm thinking in our program specifically because there is like a higher amount of on-the-job learning required and competencies and all of that associated with it on top of the CDA requirements. Is there like variation in credit for prior learning that way?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And you know, part of what we really tried to get at in developing this framework is, you know, understanding which courses can really are better fit for credit for prior learning, and balancing both the need to acknowledge someone who maybe has worked in the field for X number of years and the credit that we can give them for that experience versus the fundamental tools that an educator learns in the classroom, and balancing those two things it's been a delicate balance, to be quite honest with you all.
And then the credit for prior learning is mostly being considered at sort of the entry teacher level, or is there also consideration for the director course?
Right now, it is only intro to early childhood education. That was where our campus teams felt most comfortable weaving in credit for prior learning. That is not to say that that's where it ends. I think this is just the first step. It is also going to be, you know, as we continue these conversations, there are just differing opinions philosophically about the use of this for certain pieces of it. So yes, just the one course for now, but it is hopeful that we'll see an expansion there.
Thanks.
Jessica?
I'm so sorry, where I am is very loud, but I do have some follow-up comments. So you said in the beginning of your presentation that relationship building is a huge priority. So could you tell us kind of what is needed to continue relationship building, or things that come into mind when we think about next steps for continuing that relationship building? And then also another consideration that I think of is if we are connecting with schools and trying to get students in schools, are we also implementing hybrid accessibility for classes? I'm currently at an institution where students are being forced to take education classes in person, and sometimes that doesn't make sense. So how are we being flexible and really thinking about that before we fund things or get things going? Thank you.
Sure. So I will acknowledge and admit that a lot of the relationship building that we have been doing has been fully internal. It's with our campus teams, it's with EEC. I think that there is an argument to be made that that does not need to continue going forward. I'll be honest, credit for prior learning piece, it's very internal, functional kind of work, right? We have not we've not done any outreach, any marketing, any direct contact with providers. I'm not sure what the best next step is. What I do know is that our folks a year in are invested in moving forward together and giving them the opportunity to have these conversations like this about where they would like to see us go, I think has a tremendous amount of value. I will also note, things like Mass Reconnect that have a lot of focus, and it's kind of a lot of people are paying more attention to the community colleges. We need to also match things like that with creativity that meets the needs of the workforce. Running classes at times that are not 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I think one of the things that we had begun to explore that we need to spend more time with is training in other languages. It's a bit of a hurdle. It's not as straightforward as it could be, particularly around in classroom or in the higher ed classrooms. But I think it's something that we do need to continue to explore. So I don't want to take us off topic, and I know we're nearing time, but if folks had other questions about Mass Reconnect and how it might impact the early educator workforce, I am happy to field questions on that, but also recognize that there may be other things that we need to cover.
I think we've come to the end of our agenda. So it certainly looks like we've got a few minutes if anybody has questions on that front, and then also, Commissioner, if you have anything that you want to make sure you have time to discuss at the end, we can make sure we allow for that.
No, I guess I just open it up to others. I mean, there's a lot of other work happening on the workforce side of things. I think we highlighted these 3 things. There's a lot of work happening on credentialing that we'll bring back to this group as well at some point. But are there particular areas or questions from members that you'd like us to address with the extra time, or we can give it back to you? Oh, go ahead, Heidi.
I think there's no doubt that we need educators at all different levels in the classrooms and outside the classrooms. One area that I have, or that we've seen a bigger challenge with in recruiting and retaining that is somewhat new, I'd say it's probably an impact of COVID, is the director level. And that there are not enough directors on the directors that are out there, and there are definitely not enough directors who are skilled and knowledgeable and have any type of experience. So there's entry-level directors are sort of assistant director. There are people who are interested in that role, but when you go beyond that, it's a bit of a challenge. And I'm not sure what exactly it could be implemented or incorporated to help in that area, but I think that area is even going to become more challenging as even more and more people get older or leave the field. So sort of wanted to bring that up as a concept, a placeholder or something for people to think about. I don't expect any concrete answers with it, but it's without a doubt one of the bigger challenges that we're having nowadays.
Yeah, I'm hearing it everywhere I go to, Heidi. And I think the director position is so stressful and complicated right now with the workforce crisis, just really driving it home. So I think people are steering away from that. So I know Jocelyn and her team and the ECSOs and others have been thinking about the leadership supports, and our offices have been running some leadership director groups to try and at least provide some support in the immediate term. But I think it's a good topic for us to be thinking about what's the concrete and direct supports to encourage and support new leadership. Jocelyn, do you want to jump in?
Succession plans, I think, may also be something, not entirely sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important piece of it, is thinking about who might be trained up for the role. So you can think about staff within a program. And again, that I think connects back to a piece of the apprenticeship work that we didn't really talk about, but that is a part of it. It's being a director is a different job than being an educator. And I think we see in so many places the director leaves, and so a teacher is like, here you go. Good luck. Maybe taking the admin course while they're trying to figure out how to do the job. And that's not what we want. So I think that's a really important point, both in the short term and then in the long term. I think one thing that we're really committed to is just providing a greater awareness in the field overall that there are opportunities for professional growth, and that you can continue to think about where you're going over time. Once you're in the classroom, it doesn't just end there, that you land in the classroom and stay there forever. That's definitely something that's we hear all the time. There's a great deal of concern about. Oh.
Jessica, your hand up.
So yeah, I just wanted to maybe transition the conversation to something that was brought up, but maybe is relevant, not relevant, but as we prepare for 2024, thinking about family engagement, and thinking about how EEC can support us on larger facets of really navigating that and maybe setting the tone of what that looks like. I think it's really important that EEC supports providers and center-based center directors and things that sort, really refining and promoting how important education is, and really getting all of us on the same page in the new year, and having whether it's, EEC, I don't know, like learning opportunities for like new parents. I just think there's a lot of supports that are needed for parents that we do need to be more reflective also of as we engage and have these classes. So then we're making classes for teachers to better prepare our students, and where the students are, and also be able to better support parents. I think as an independent provider, I'm always trying to find new ways, but it's hard. And I wish that there was just a little bit more accessibility of opportunities and resources to connect my families, not just my current families, but my past ones, and really connect us. So not on the agenda, but just thinking about families moving forward in 2024 and what we need, because I know all of us need a hug.
Thank you, Jessica. That's such an important point. Something I know there's been a lot of thinking about in different places at the agency as well. So we can think about how to surface that and highlight it as well. But thank you for that.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, we'll give you 10 minutes back and send you off with best wishes for a healthy and happy holiday season. And we'll see you all after the new year. Thank you for everything and all your support.
Thanks all.